Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche, Shavua Tov, a good week. I'm excited to welcome you to this new program, MyLife, Tanya Applied. I say a new program, even though we all know that there's nothing new, especially when it comes to godly things, to Torah things. Everything that is new was given to us before, but there's new ways to experience it. And in this case, I want to acknowledge, and more than acknowledge, I'm honored to recognize that literally 61 years ago, this week, in the year 1960, the iconic Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg, with the Lubavitcher Rebbe's encouragement and blessing, initiated a landmark effort. We began to teach Tanya, lessons in Tanya, Shiurim B'Sefer Tanya, on the radio every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night. Why is it landmark? Because it was the first time where technology was used to disseminate Torah. Today it's common. It's everywhere. But in 1960 it was pioneering. And this went on for over 40 years. Rabbi Weinberg was Zeicha, merited to have the Lubavitcher Rebbe edit every one of these classes that he gave, and as well as the Rebbe listening to each program. So I'd like to say that this new series is dedicated in merit of Rav Yosef Halevi Weinberg, Olav HaSholem, and in merit of Harav Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz, who participated, filled in, and continued teaching in this series of programs. It's interesting to note that Rabbi Katz's yahrzeit, 35th yahrzeit, is this Shabbos, the second day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. I want to also say it's in l'schus and merit to his son, Yibod l'chaim l'chaim, Tarichas Shomim v'shonim tevis, Rav Zev Yecheskel, and his dear wife Risha Katz. May they be well and healthy for many good years. I also want to acknowledge a famed chassid and asken and activist, Rab Shmuel Plotkin, for initiating this, for reaching out to me and making this happen. So with these acknowledgments in place, so on one hand, yes, this is a new program in English with a hope of really bringing alive this classic work, Tanya, into our personal lives, but it's also a continuation of something that began 61 years ago. So with that being said, let's begin the actual study. Introduction. Tanya was first published in the year 1796, Tov Kuf Nun Zayin, authored by the famous Baal Tanya v'Shulchan Aruch, the author of Tanya and Shulchan Aruch, Rav Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chassidus Chabad. We will be discussing, in his own words, in Rav Shneir Zalman's words, why he wrote the Tanya. But just in my own short synopsis, Tanya is an indispensable sefer and book that can literally transform each one of our lives, because it gathers together all of the Torah, and especially Pnimis HaTorah, the spiritual dimension and esoteric dimension, but turns it into a blueprint for life. It's a guide that helps us deal with our struggles, that helps us deal with our own personal challenges, helps us serve God in a more wholesome, honest, and sincere way, and really addresses every issue that we struggle with and that we deal with. So we will begin. We will be reading the text, but it's not going to be text heavy. The focus will be on understanding the flow, the pshat, the simple interpretation, even though it's a complex and very scholarly work. But above all, a takeaway message. A takeaway message that is relevant to each one of us. So each program will have that takeaway message. So let us begin. We begin from the beginning, which is the Sharblat, the cover page of Tanya itself. The cover page of Tanya was written, which isn't common, by the author himself. He wrote the cover page. So if you have a Tanya and you want to follow along, you can do that, or you can just listen. I will read and explain every line that we're going to be addressing here. So the Sefer is called Sefer Likutei Amorim. These are the words of the Alter Rebbe, the author, on the cover page of Tanya. Sefer Likutei Amorim. Chelik Rishon. Because the book, Tanya, consists of actually 5 sections. So this is the first section. Hanikra b'shem Sefer Shel Beinanim. It's called by the name Sefer Shel Beinanim, which literally means the book of intermediates. Now, why Beinanim? We'll be learning inside from the Gemara that you have a tzaddik, a Beinani, and a rasha. 3 general categories. A righteous person, a wicked person, that's the literal interpretation, and a Beinani, an intermediate. Now, on a very ostensible level, everyone thinks righteous means someone who does only good things, wicked is an evil person, and a Beinani is somewhere half-half. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain much deeper and more profound that it's not exactly the case. That a Beinani is actually the natural personality of each one of us, where we have a struggle between to do what is right or to do what is driven by self-interest. And the goal is to master that ability to control the destiny of your life, which of course we'll be talking about more as we go into the Tanya. Sefer Shel Beinanim. We're told that the Alter Rebbe also wrote a Sefer Shel Tzadikim, which you can imagine, even this Sefer is quite a standard to live up to. But the Sefer Shel Tzadikim was burned in a fire, and the Tzadikim of the time said it was burned in a fire because the world could not contain such a powerful Sefer. We're not ready for it. So though it was written, but it didn't end up being something that we have access to. So we continue now. Sefer Shel Beinanim, and the Alter Rebbe writes, Melukat mi pisvarim pisayfrim. It's collected, he writes, in humility, from Sfarim, from books, which Chassidim always interpret as being primarily the Maral, Miprag, and the Shaloh HaKadosh, umipi sofrim, and from scribes. And that is alluding to the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mizrich. Remember, the Alter Rebbe was a student of the Mizrich Maggid, together with all his colleagues, who in turn was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So that's what he means by Bipi Sofrim. Kadeshe Elyon Nishmose Eden, the holy ones, the lofty ones, souls in heaven. Miyusad, and now is the key. The Alter Rebbe in 1-2 lines is going to tell us the theme and the point and the objective of this entire Sefer. Miyusad, it's based on Al Posuk, on the verse in Nitzavim, in Parshat Nitzavim, Ki korev elecha hadover me'eid beficha u'belvavcha la'asese. A verse that Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, Ki korev elecha, this thing. In general, we're talking about Judaism, Torah, mitzvahs, tshuva, is korev elecha, hadover me'eid. It's very close is the literal interpretation, but let's better use the word relevant. Accessible. Very accessible to you. Beficha, in your mouth, speech. Ubelvavcha, in your heart. La'asese, an implementation. Actionable. Essentially, the 3 garments, the 3 ways a human being expresses himself or herself. Thought, speech, and action. Here the order is speech, thought, and action. And what is this Tanya going to do, this book? Levayed Hativ, to explain well, to explain clearly. Eichu Karev Me'ed. How is it accessible? How is it relevant? The verse tells us it's relevant, it's Karev, very close, very relevant, very accessible, but how? It will explain it, and I will explain it with an interesting expression Alter Rebbe uses now. B'derech arucha uktzara. In a long and short way, be'ezras Hashem Yizbarach, with God's help, with God Almighty's help. These are the few lines written on the Sharblat, the actual cover page of Tanya. Now this alone we can dwell upon and discuss for hours upon hours. But we'll see in a moment how in succinct and short terms the Alter Rebbe, the brilliant Alter Rebbe, called Shnei Oyer, as it's explained, his name Shnei Oyer means two levels of Oyer. The Oyer of Nigla the Torah, the revealed Torah, the body of Torah and the words of the Zohar, Gufa Daraisa, and Oyer Primis HaTorah, Nishmosa Daraisa, the soul of Torah, Shnei Oyer. This great scholar, this great genius, this brilliant Gaon, how in short words, short as long, captures one of the most essential themes, if not the most essential theme of our lives and our times. So what is the Alter Rebbe saying? Let's dissect this a moment. He's basing it on a pasuk. So let's talk about the pasuk. What is Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Jewish people? So Parshat Nitzavim, we know, is the last sefer Mishnah Torah. These are the last 37 days of Moshe's life. And he's telling them his last will and testament, so to speak. It begins, Eila hadvarim asher dibra Moshe, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and Moshe's neshama will go back up Lamaila, Zayin Oder. So 37 days. In those days, he shares, and one of the things he says, that you may think, I'm paraphrasing, that this Torah and mitzvahs that you were given, that we all received at Har Sinai, from God, at Sinai, may be difficult, may be inaccessible, may be distant. He says, no. It's not distant. It's not across a wide sea. It's not in heaven. What is it? Ki. However, it is ki korev elecha davar me'ed. This thing, this Torah mitzvahs that you were given is korev elecha, accessible, relevant. Hadavar me'ed, not just relevant, but very me'ed in all your forms of expression, speech, heart, thought, and action. So Moshe is essentially preempting a question that everybody can have. Torah mitzvahs is not easy. It's a difficult journey. It requires commitment. It requires obligation. It requires dealing with your temptations and challenges. The Torah is full of regulations. So Moshe is preempting the question and giving them strength, the Jewish people then and for all generations till today, by saying, no, it is accessible. You can connect. You can integrate and internalize it in your life. However, he doesn't say how. Comes the Alter Rebbe, Eich hu karev ma'ed. How is it close? How is it relevant and accessible? And that requires an entire sefer. Why? What's missing here? Why can't we just learn the verse, learn some of the commentaries? We need a whole sefer, a sefer Tanya, of chapters upon chapters, 53 chapters, to tell us that it's karev elecha davar me'ed. Is that what we really need? So we need to analyze the word karev. And it's always good to put things into historical context. 1796, when this sefer was first published, remember manuscripts were already going around. What was the situation in the world at the time? It was a very interesting transitionary period. This was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It was the time of the emancipation of the Jewish people. It also included the birth, essentially, of modern assimilation. So the Alter Rebbe wasn't just living in a time that things were regular. There's no such thing as a regular time, frankly. But this was a time of major change. It was the beginning of the modern age. What were, in brief, the major challenges facing the Jewish people, and in effect really the entire world, was adjusting to these new realities. It's one thing you're living in a shtetl, in a ghetto. Even if you want to, you can't mingle and assimilate. The Jewish people were not allowed to do that. That was one type of world. Here, things were beginning to change. The new waves of freedom and tolerance, and which of course, in many ways, was a blessing for the Jewish people. Less oppression, less taxation, less expulsions, less pogroms, though it was still far from that situation. But the shifts were beginning to happen. So the Alter Rebbe, as a true leader, was addressing new dilemmas. And above all, it was the issue, what would happen with Yiddishkeit? With now the new opportunities that would be coming, look what happened. It decimated Rahman al-Islam. Over time, not overnight, over time, people started having other alternatives. What was lacking, above all, was we're no longer in that secluded, insulated, immunized environment. So now the issue of Karevei Lecha comes very prominent. Will Yiddishkeit and Torah be relevant even when I have a competition of a Western world and all its temptations? Whether it's financial, money, whether it's culture. So the Alter Rebbe recognizing that, in truth really following the footsteps of his teachers, the Seifrim, the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov, recognizing that, realized we now need to articulate that which was not articulated till now. A book, a sefer, that would present a moral, spiritual, psychological guide to make it eichu karev ma'id. How is it deeply relevant to you to the point that it should be indispensable? In other words, your Yiddishkeit shouldn't be based purely on mitzvahs anoshim ulamoda, mechanical Judaism, just because your parents did it. That may not be enough. For some people it may be enough. But we need it to be now personal. You need to own it. Karevei lecha hadavar ma'id. So what Moshe Rabbeinu said thousands of years ago now took on a new challenge. There was always a challenge. But the Alter Rebbe recognized that now we need to be able to teach Yiddishkeit, not just you're doing it by rote, or because out of Kabbalah sale, you need to be able to personally experience it. And that requires a sefer. How do you make it Karevei Lecha? How do you explain how it's Karevei Lecha hadavar ma'id? How it's deeply relevant. Even till this day, whether it's in the frum world, so-called religious world, that's a great challenge. Is your Yiddishkeit cultural? Meaning you grew up with it, and basically that's your comfort zone? Or is it a personal experience? Do you own it? On your own and nobody is watching except God, how are you behaving? Not just what looks good to others. And then let's talk about the other part of the world. The unfortunate Tineke Shenishbu, the majority of the unaffiliated Jews, who are like children born into captivity, that don't know better, they definitely don't see the relevance. Because we're not even taught the basics. Not at their fault. So that Alter Rebbe's words, Eichu karev ma'id, I don't want to use the word prophetic, but he was understanding, he took the pulse of a generation and of generations to come and realized how important it will be for all chugim, for all groups of Jews, those that are committed and grow up with it and those that did not, to explain how. There's a word they say that the Baal Shem Tov taught also in these dark times. He taught how that each person can serve God. And the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, taught how each person can serve God. The example is given that Baal Shem Tov provided a ladder, and the Alter Rebbe taught how to climb the ladder. So the Sefer Tanya is how to climb the ladder, a step-by-step process. that addresses the entire scope of all the challenges we have, whether it's between you and yourself, between you and God, between you and other people, bein adam lechavere, between individuals, interpersonal, or between you and God, bein adam lamokim, avodas Hashem on all levels. How you can make it relevant to you. And when I say relevant means it takes on a predominant role. It's indispensable to your life. That's our challenge. That Judaism, Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvah shouldn't just be something we do, something due to culture or habit or routine, but something that we own, something that we internalize, that we feel we can't live without, just like we can't live without food, bread, water, and oxygen. That's what he's coming to explain. And for that you need a sefer of many chapters, because you need to internalize it, you need to apply it. And that will be the focus of our new program. To learn the Tanya, but with that emphasis of the Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed. And then he goes on and says, B'derech harucha k'tzara. What's B'derech harucha k'tzara? So before we continue, let me just pause. Station identification, as they like to say. This is Simon Jacobson, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, on a new program called MyLife, Tanya Applied. This is every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night, 10 to 10:30 p.m., but you can also listen. It'll all be archived. Broadcast on WSNR, 6:20 a.m., New York. In New Jersey, Highland Park in Edison, New Jersey is WJPR. And you can also listen by phone, listen line 641-741-0389. For more information and for the archived recordings and programs and many more resources, please go to ChassidusApplied.com. Okay, so let's now go to the next expression, B'derech harucha k'tzara. Interesting, seems almost paradoxical statement. So those of you familiar with a little Gemara, no. This actually is it's a Gemara, it's a Lashon Gemara. In Erevin, Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, 53b, it tells a story, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. Miyomei lo natzchoni Adam, Ella, and he tells the story of a team. Nobody ever prevailed over me except this child. What was the story? Once I was traveling, and I see a child that standing or sitting at a crossroad. Proshas Drachim. I said to him, my child, my son, which is the path to the city, since it was a crossroad? So he said to me, this path is the long and short path, and this is the short and long path. So I took the short and long one. It sounded shorter. When I came to the city, I saw it was surrounded by forests and by woods, by underbrush, and I couldn't get through. So I went back to the crossroad, and I said to this child, my son, didn't you tell me this was the short path? And he said to me, Rabbi, my teacher, my master, yes, but didn't I not say to you that it's k'tzara v'arucha? It's short and long. So then he went on the next path, which was the long and short path. It was longer in pure mileage, but it was shorter because it didn't have any obstacles. So the Alter Rebbe says that he's going to do Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed, Korav, but B'derech harucha k'tzara. So there's two interpretations generally about Derech harucha k'tzara. Chassidim would interpret that it means, because the Alter Rebbe in Tanya itself, he gives two approaches. One is Derech harucha, which takes more work, contemplation and hard work to achieve self-control and self-mastery. And there's a Derech Tzara, which is accessing the Ava Musuteres, the hidden love, the essential love that every Jew has to God, which is a Derech Tzara, which begins in chapter 18 and on, and the long way is until chapter 18. But the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, no. The Lashon Derech Harucha Tzara's mashma appears not as two different approaches. that it's one approach which is aruch and ktsara. There are times we take an approach where we get easily inspired, stimulated. So initially it's short, but it doesn't last because it's not integrated and internalized. There's another approach which takes more time until you ignite, until you internalize. But once it's internalized, it remains with you forever. And that's the approach the Alter Rebbe takes. Not a quick fix. An approach that will take work, but that work will be internalized. It's the difference between lighting logs, and lighting twigs. Twigs burn quickly, but they also burn out quickly. A log, it may take time till you get for it to catch, but once it does, it burns. It's because it's become internalized. And then be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach, with God's help. So literally that means God's help, that God will help. The Alter Rebbe, he's saying with God's help, I will achieve this goal. But there's another meaning in Ezus Hashem Yisbarach, that when you put this work in, even though it's hard work, God will help you make sure that you will achieve your goal. Yegaito matzasi. Effort will be rewarded. This, my dear friends, is the first opening of Tanya, the cover page, and just imagine what it opens up for us. It tells us we are going to have a blueprint, an approach to make Yiddishkeit, Torah and mitzvahs relevant, more relevant than anything else in life, to the point that you will not want to live without it, because you'll see how vital it is for your own personal life, for your health, your physical health, your spiritual health, for your connection with God, for your connection with others, in every possible way to experience that type of relevance. So with that, we conclude this inaugural opening program, which will, Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach, continue week after week. I welcome you again. Thank you so much. And God bless you all.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChassidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.